There's a number that should make every economist uncomfortable. Not the unemployment rate, not inflation, not the deficit. A different number, the one that describes how many jobs artificial intelligence is positioned to touch, reshape, or eliminate in the next decade. The IMF puts it at around 40% of global employment, in advanced economies closer to 60%. Goldman Sachs estimates the equivalent of 300 million full-time jobs globally are exposed to automation through generative AI alone. Those are not science fiction projections. Those are institutional forecasts from the organizations that governments and central banks actually listen to. And here is the problem. Nobody in the boardroom wants to say out loud, if workers stop earning wages, who exactly is supposed to buy everything? Capitalism has always had this tension running through it. Every company wants labor costs as low as possible when it is paying workers. But every company needs wages as high as possible when those same workers become customers. One firm can replace its employees with AI and still sell into an economy where everyone else's employees are earning. That looks efficient. That looks smart. Investors reward it. The stock price rises. The CEO gives a calm speech about productivity and the future of work. But when every firm follows the same logic simultaneously, something breaks. The economy becomes extraordinarily good at producing things for people who can no longer afford them. That is not a technology problem. That is a capitalism problem. And it is not a new one. The first time machines threatened mass employment at scale, the response was not polite. Between 1811 and 1816, textile workers in England began destroying factory machinery. History remembers them as the Luddites, a word that today gets used as an insult, meaning someone irrationally afraid of progress. That reading misses the point entirely. The original Luddites were not afraid of machines. They were skilled craftsmen who understood exactly what the machines were doing, not just producing more cloth, but systematically destroying their bargaining power, devaluing their expertise, and transferring control of their livelihoods to factory owners who had no interest in sharing the gains. The fight was never humans against machines. It was workers against the people who owned the machines. That distinction matters enormously right now, because AI is not arriving in an empty room. It is arriving inside an economic system where ownership is already highly concentrated, where workers already have limited bargaining power, and where the firms deploying AI have strong incentives to capture the productivity gains rather than share them. What makes this wave different from previous automation is where it is aimed. Previous technology largely targeted physical labor and routine tasks. Factories, assembly lines, data entry, checkout counters. The advice given to workers for decades was consistent. Move up, get educated, develop skills, move into knowledge work, become harder to replace. AI is now moving directly into the work people were told to get educated to do. Writing, legal review, financial analysis, code, design, research, customer service, translation, accounting, marketing, diagnosis, administration. The knowledge economy, the destination workers were pointed toward, is now inside the blast radius. A junior lawyer who once spent years doing document review to build experience now competes with software that does it faster and cheaper. A copywriter who spent a decade developing a voice now competes with a model that generates 10 variations in 30 seconds. A financial analyst who built expertise in modeling now works alongside tools that automate most of what made that expertise valuable. The career ladder is not just changing. In some industries, the bottom rungs are being removed entirely. And you cannot build experienced professionals if the entry-level jobs where people become experienced no longer exist. At the company level, the incentives are clear and almost impossible to resist. AI reduces labor costs. It speeds output. It scales without hiring. It lets one person do what previously required 5. It gives executives a story investors love. Margins are expanding, productivity is rising, the company is becoming leaner. What the worker hears as an AI assistant, the investor hears as margin expansion. Those are not the same sentence. And no single company can afford to be the last human-employing firm in an industry where competitors are automating. The pressure runs in one direction, not because every executive wants mass unemployment, but because each firm is doing what makes rational sense for itself inside a system that rewards cost reduction and punishes hesitation. That is how systemic problems emerge from individually rational decisions, not through conspiracy, through structure. So what happens to demand? Workers are not just producers. They are customers. They pay rent, buy food, service debt, purchase cars, fund healthcare, pay for childcare, subscribe to things, and keep the consumer economy alive. The wage is not just compensation for labor. It is the mechanism through which most people participate in the economy as buyers. If AI weakens the wage system broadly enough, the economy faces a demand problem. It can produce more. It just cannot find enough people with enough income to absorb what it produces. Historically, capitalism has patched this gap in three ways. Debt, letting households borrow to sustain consumption when wages fall short. Government transfers. Welfare, benefits, and public spending that maintain purchasing power when private employment cannot. And asset wealth, rising property and investment values that support spending among those who own assets. None of these is a clean solution. Debt is future income already claimed. Government transfers require a tax base that AI may erode. Asset wealth is distributed far too unevenly to substitute for broad wage income. And underneath all of this sits a question governments have not yet seriously answered. If AI replaces labor income at scale, what replaces the tax revenue that funds public services, pensions, healthcare, and the social infrastructure that keeps the system politically stable? The honest answer to all of this is that it depends on one thing. Not how powerful AI becomes, not how fast it spreads, not which jobs survive and which disappear. It depends on who owns it. Who owns the models? Who owns the chips? Who owns the data centers and the cloud infrastructure and the platforms that every business will increasingly depend on? Who captures the productivity gains when one worker becomes 5 times more effective? Railroads shaped industrial capitalism because they controlled movement. Oil shaped the 20th century because it controlled energy. The firms that own AI infrastructure may shape this century because they control cognition, the thing that was supposed to be the one advantage humans retained. If that ownership stays concentrated, AI becomes a mechanism for extracting more value from the same number of people while employing fewer of them. Productivity rises, demand weakens, inequality deepens. The system becomes increasingly efficient at producing things for people who cannot afford them. If ownership becomes broader, through higher wages, stronger public investment, fairer taxation, wider asset distribution, or new institutional arrangements, then AI could become something genuinely different. Shorter working weeks, better public services, more human time for things machines cannot replicate. Technology does not decide who benefits from progress. Power does. The machine can produce more. The market will reward whoever owns it. The state can rewrite the rules if it chooses to. Workers can organize, adapt, or be forced to absorb the shock alone. Nothing about AI automatically produces shared prosperity, but nothing about it automatically produces collapse either. What it does produce with absolute certainty is a question that capitalism has never fully resolved and can no longer defer. When the machine takes the job, who buys the product? The answer to that question will define the next chapter of economic history. If this gave you a different way of seeing the world, subscribe to the Fiscal Record. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.